I'm here with Kevin Kelly. Kevin, thanks so much for making the time to speak with me on the podcast.
It's my privilege and pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. I've been really enjoying going through your book, Excellent Advice for Living. Um, there are some things in there that I wish I had known earlier, and had to find out the hard way. And so
Yeah,
when I read them in your book, I was like, yep, that's definitely good advice and something I wish I had known before I learned it the hard way. Yeah.
right. Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of bits like that. And there's other bits that I kind of knew already, but never really was able to put it into a form that I could remember or remind myself. So a lot of these are kind of reminders.
Yeah, nice little aphorisms for life.
Yeah.
And for people who aren't familiar with you and your work, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just giving a brief introduction on like maybe what qualifies you to give advice.
I'm completely unqualified to give advice. In fact, all the jobs I'm doing, I've been unqualified for. I'm a college dropout and have no serious training in anything really. I've been photographing for 50 years, all self-taught. And I wrote in a kind of a roundabout way of making my captions longer. I don't like to write still. It's really painful for me. I like to write really short. This is thus the book, which is a book of sentences. And I have lived 71 years, so that's some advantage in looking at the world. And I've been able to hang around a lot of people who had very little money, very little of anything in Asia. That was sort of my stomping ground, was people who had very little. And I've been privileged to hang around with the richest people in the world, and everybody in between. So I have some experience from that. And I also would say I'm maybe one of the happiest people that I know. So that might give me some bit of a platform to talk about. It's like if you're gonna get a health advice, make sure it's a really healthy person that's giving you advice and not the sick one. So anyway, maybe those are my qualifications.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a big test for me is looking at how the advice the person is giving, especially the celebrity experts, look at
Yeah,
how it's functioning in their life.
right.
Yeah.
You want to be them if you look closely at their lives. And one of my bits of advice is you don't want to be famous, because if you're around really famous people, you see very quickly that it is nothing that you should aim for. There are people who are famous kind of inadvertently, like if you're President Obama, right? I mean, it's a heavy tax you have to pay for the rest of your life, but you don't really want to aim there, because it's debilitating. And same thing, and I'll give you a piece of advice, not in the book, to your listeners. Whatever you do, try as hard as you can not to have $1 billion. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's terrible. It's debilitating, destabilizing, very warping, terrible for your kids. And you don't need it to do anything that you want to do. That's
Yeah.
the main thing.
That's great. Okay, so let me also just plug something you neglected to mention was that you were editor and publisher of the Whole Earth Catalog, one of the greatest magazines ever made, ever. Still to this day, it's such a beautiful artifact full of incredible tidbits of information and instructions for living an alternative lifestyle and do it yourself. I mean, that was the kind of beginning of DIY life,
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. The Whole Earth Catalog for a long time was the only place you could find really useful information on how to do something, whatever it was, whether it was repairing a car, building a house, learning welding, sewing, how to do a homeschool. I mean, before the internet, so the whole catalog was the internet before there was an internet. It's like an internet printed on newsprint.
Mhm.
And I had the privilege to edit and publish that and write for it. And that formed a lot of me. But I had things to overcome because of that. I was so biased to doing yourself that it took me a long time to realize that the most valuable thing I could do with my time was to hire out stuff, to outsource as much as I could, to get someone else to volunteer their precious time to work on something. And so yeah, you can go too far into do it yourself, which I might have gone too far.
Mm.
But yeah, I was editing the Horth catalog. And by the way, we just finished rescanning all the issues to put up at the Internet Archive. And so very soon there'll be a fresh set of PDFs that anybody can look at. And you're
Ooh.
right. If you look at them now, they kind of read like blog posts.
Yep.
And it's exactly the same sensibility, which is the informed, knowledgeable enthusiast who is wanting to share something they know that most people don't know about. And that was exactly what we were running in the old days.
Yeah. And, I see it as like an expression of a real renegade kind of spirit where probably like yourself, where it's not about having conventional credentials,
Right.
right, that bring you a sense of authority or something. But it's about like kind of hard-earned wisdom, like
Yeah.
learning as you go,
It's
learning
a
through
lot.
trial and error.
And that a lot of that sensibility energy went over to the blogs and people who were blogging and now maybe Substack to some extent. It's that same quality. But at that time in the 70s, and even 80s, there was no alternative. There was no place for people like that to share what they know, what they had learned, and what they were enthusiastic about, what they knew about. There was no vehicle. And now, of course, there are millions or thousands or hundreds of thousands of different options. There was none except for Horth and the magazine that we ran. So I often have difficulty conveying to my kids the poverty of information that was the world before there was the internet. It seems so obvious now that this is necessary, this meaning the flow of information, the YouTubes, the blogs, the encyclopedias. It's like hard to imagine a modern life without it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yet we, like through kind of persistence, we could find what we were looking for usually, but we had to go out and seek it.
I couldn't find it anywhere.
No.
No.
Well,
Like
so you had already laid the groundwork for me growing up in the 80s and 90s,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there
But
was like resources like the Whole Earth catalog to go to, right?
yeah. Before them in the 60s, and even early 70s, there was no way. Like, say you wanted to, I don't know, learn how to build
A chicken coop.
a chicken coop, or even something more esoteric. You wanted to do saltwater aquariums or something. Where would you ever be able to find out about that? Or even to buy some materials, like maybe you want to buy some kind of styrene that they use to make models with. Where would you go? Where would you look? Like, even if it was sold locally somewhere, how would you ever know that? And so that distance is much. We've gone so far that it's really kind of hard to kind of even imagine going back to that at all.
Yeah. Well, I thought, there's over 400 little pieces of advice in the book. And I thought, okay, how can we bring this into focus for a lot of the people who listen to this podcast?
Right.
So I thought if we focused on advice that could apply to people who are creators and entrepreneurs, that might be most useful here. So I've plucked out some, and I'd like you, because I think some of them are like little zip files that we can unpack, right?
I love that image. That's fantastic. They're little zip files. Actually, the book was originally subtitled Seeds of Contemplation.
Seeds of contemplation. Yeah.
The idea was that you could kind of like unpack these seeds, little plants, these seeds, and let them grow. But the publisher didn't really kind of jive with that. So, but I like the idea of maybe I should entitle it "Zip Files for the Mind."
That's how, I've studied and practiced yoga for a long time. And that's how I always thought of the sutra form, as little zip files of information that you have to contemplate in order to unpack all the richness embedded in them.
That's really great.
Okay. Before we get to some of the zip files that are in the book, I mean, my introduction to your work outside of the Whole Earth Catalog and Wired was your essay on 1000 True Fans. And I think, I would love it if you could offer just a kind of a brief overview of that idea, because it was kind of revolutionary for me in the way I thought about, building a social media network and what success looked like. I mean, it really brought things into focus for me. So it'd be great if you could just lay that out for people.
Yeah, I like your framing of it, because part of what I may want to come back to emphasize is this idea of redefining success. So that's part of what I was trying to do. Previous to that, in the old era, success was if you were a creator, making, writer, singer, musician, photographer, sculptor, even to some extent an inventor. Success was a blockbuster, a bestseller, going platinum.
Mm-hmm. Over
And
1 million copies sold.
1 million copies. That was sort of what it took to be really successful. And that was true because there were studios and publishers and labels and intermediates involved, and they were taking the bulk of the benefits and profits. And it was not uncommon for musicians to have or appear to be, have number ones and still not be making much money because through their contracts that they had with the labels. And so I thought that with this new technology coming along, it just occurred to me that with direct engagements with your fans, that there was a new model that was very going to be possible. And it was based around the fact that if you focused on your truest fans, and I define a true fan as, nowadays they call them super fans, as anyone who is willing to, or devoted to, buy everything you produce, the soft cover, hardcover, the Kindle version, the Audible version, go to all your concerts, no matter how far away they are, to get the box sets, as well as, the autographed merch. They were just totally in. And if you could do enough to get $100 a year from them, from your true fans, you only needed 1,000 of them to make a living. You weren't going to make a fortune, but you can make a living. And there are just the truest fans, and then there's all these circles around them. They become basically the promoters of your casual fans and your evangelists. So you have an even greater circle of income. So that required, though, that you have direct engagement with them and that they send you or give you the entire amount of how they're supporting you. So 100% of what they were going to pay you went to you directly instead of to your studio or label, then that would work. And so that was the arithmetic, that was the mathematics of it. And at the time I proposed, it was kind of theoretical. I had not met anybody doing it. It just seemed like this is possible. And then this was the very beginning of when the crowdfunding websites were starting up, kind of before Patreon and Kickstarter. But as it came along, it really made it possible for people to actually live this out. And many have. And many have begun there, and then later on continue to enlarge their audience to go to the millions, where they can use the studios and the publishers and the labels. They don't mind taking that, because here's the price. There's a price. Mm-hmm. There's a but involved in in this analysis, and that is it takes quite a lot of time, a large part of your life, to cultivate those fans, to engage with them, to really be with them. You can't just take their money. They want more from you than that. So to be a true fan. So not everybody is really set up or personally designed to continue to engage with fans like that, to do all that promotion and social media that this kind of a venue entails. So like if you're going to be doing what the publishers do, you've got to do the promotion, you've got to do the advertising, you've got to do all that stuff. So it isn't for everybody, but it's a really great place to start, and many people start there, and it's the barriers are so low that I think it's a great place for most people to start. I mean, I want to continue that way, but it is a good place to start and many do continue without even expanding it, and that's fine too. So that's the general thesis. The new technology allows you to have full engagement with your fans, and if you can find 1,000 of them, pay you a reasonable amount a year, you can make a living.
Yeah. And in the essay, you point out that that scales in terms of like your lifestyle requirements. So you kind of give the model as, if you get 1,000 people to give you $100 a year for what you do, that's $100,000, which is going to cover a lot of people's lifestyle. But if you have less requirements, then you need less fans or need to charge them less for what you're offering, that kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
Now, I wonder, so in the time since you initially wrote that, and even since I think you revised it, I think people have gotten really used to the abundance of free content out there, which is paid for in other ways. It's paid for through advertisement or, celebrities funding their own podcast platforms or YouTube channels, that kind of thing. So there's a kind of hidden source of funding behind it. And people have gotten really used to just getting stuff for free, which has made it difficult for independent producers like me to get people to pay for what I'm offering. So I'm wondering if you have any advice around the different approaches. Like, one is to keep everything behind a paywall, maybe like let little samples get out to give people an idea of what's behind the paywall. Or my approach has been to give everything for free and hope that people will find it in their hearts to give you a little something for it.
Yeah, there's all kinds of models. I would say just in general, and setting aside podcasts at the moment, just in general, in the past couple of years, there's been a move to subscriptions, which for me has always been the best model. The magazines we were talking earlier, the Whole Earth catalog, we had no advertising. We were completely subscriber supported, which was beautiful in many ways, not so good in others. The beautiful thing was it was a very, what's the word I want? A very authentic, substantial, significant, and liberating source, because we could do what we wanted without having to have the second customer, which was the advertisers. With Wired, we went commercial. The advantage of going with ads is that it was a much bigger scale. We could scale up. The problem with subscribers is kind of like 1,000 true fans. We had 20 or 30,000 subscribers, and we just couldn't find that many more people who were willing to subscribe. So we kept it all, but it was a smaller world. Whereas with advertising and you have the free coming in, the magazine is almost basically free. You have a bigger audience. So that there's in the past couple of years, there's been a kind of a shift now where people are beginning to understand that the really good stuff and the stuff that they want to support is going to be subscription based by and large. And there's different ways of doing that. One thing I would note that in China, for very odd reasons, podcasts are not free. You pay for
no podcasts are free.
Yeah, you pay for podcasts.
Huh.
And I think somewhat like or like Netflix, where you have these big aggregators that are giving you all the podcasts that they have. So part of this is education of what we come to expect. I don't think that we can completely go away from the free, because even Netflix is going to probably have a free version if they don't already. And I think that's what we're going to see, is kind of like, I pay for YouTube Premium. It's like one of the best bargains in the world. I mean, I'm telling you, if you watch any amount of YouTube, get the premium version, because you see no ads. It's just fabulous. Okay. And so there'll be this kind of a thing where, yeah, if usually occasionally I get the free version, I see the ads. If I'm really committed to it, I don't want to, then I'll subscribe. So the people I know who are podcasting, some of the ones that they're doing, like Sam Harris, is a very creative one. I don't know about if you've encountered his, is very, very simple. The first half of the podcast is free. All right. And then if you want to hear the whole podcast, you pay for it. So you're going along, it's a great podcast. And then in the middle of the sentence, it just stops. It's like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So, and other people do that where I'm not sure if anybody did an article where the article runs along until you get halfway, and then you have to pay.
Substack allows you to do that.
Yeah. Substack. So there's versions of that. I think maybe in the short term, this is a struggle, but I think over time, people are going to come to understand, to be educated, that there may be multiple versions of things where you can get kind of like, a lot of games are that way too. They're the free version, the premium, the freemium, some version of it you can get, or software is very much like this these days, where you can get some things, you get a feel of it, where you like it, and then at a higher level, you're going to have to pay for things. I think that generally seems to be where we're going with this. There are all kinds of Patreons where people are like you're doing, is saying, Jason Kotkin, his website, which has been around for almost 25 years, it's like, yeah, I have a patronage. If you really are supporting me, here's what it is. I'm not going to charge anything. I think what's really wonderful is we have an emerging set of different kind of tools, and you can kind of try different things to see what works for you and your tribe. And it may be that the Patreon is the kinds of relationships that you want to have, and it may be that you have a freemium version of things. It may be that you have two different kinds of information that you do. We've had a weekly podcast for 6 years, and we have affiliate links in the description of the podcast, which is way down the line. It covers our costs of hosting and doing all that kind of stuff, and that's about it. So that's sort of where we landed on that. But I think we're still in that process of educating people, and we're now coming to understand that the free is not going to go away. It's freemium. I talked about this in my 98 book on the new economy. Follow the free. That's the free is, you start with the free, then you follow the free. So I think you'll and other podcasters will end up with some version of it being free, some amount of it being free, some set of it, and then there are deeper or fuller or additional things that you're going to charge for. I think generally that seems to be the pattern.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, let's dive into some of these little bits of advice. No particular order, just the ones that kind of jumped out at me the most. Okay, this one I think is really helpful for people who are trying to figure out like what their niche is in whatever kind of world they're working, right? I think it applies anywhere. The thing that made you weird as a kid could make you great as an adult if you don't lose it.
Right.
Tell me about that one. Unpack that one.
Well, I mean, I just so many people I met in Silicon Valley who describing their youth and their childhood, they were weird people. They were weird in their approach, weird some of them autistic, weird for their hobbies. A great example of someone I do not know personally, but it was just a great story, was people like Jim Henson and the guy, Kevin, I can't remember his name, who did Elmo, the Muppets, or Big Bird, Carol, who was doing Big Bird. All these were like young guys, teenagers who loved puppets. I mean, they were just weird. They were the weird people in their class, grown teenagers really into puppets. But that's just one example of that. They didn't lose that weirdness. They just went with it. And it could be something that, something weird that you do, kind of an affinity for an approach, going to first principles, memorizing things. It's hard to describe, but it's very clear to me that the kind of remarkable people that I admire were kind of weirdos, but they kept it. They didn't. The education system and society tends to want to hammer out and make you a lot rounder. I think it is good to be slightly well-rounded.
Round enough.
Round enough, but we need to have some angles and sharpness, because that's where the pointy things are the ones that made the breakthroughs. And so, so you don't want to lose all of it. And I think kind of gravitating to something that you were weird about as a kid says that there's probably something in you about that particular direction or attraction, that there's something there. And whether maybe you're a model builder, or maybe you collected weird stuff, or you're into ants. And so I had a friend who was early into ants as a kid, and then tried all kinds of stuff, and finally said, "Yeah, I'm going with the ants." Became an entomologist, the Smithsonian Institution, so he followed his weird.
Yeah. My wife and I were sitting around having lunch earlier, and I was reading her some of the ones I'd picked out, and we were kind of like test driving them. And so I brought this one up, and then we started just kind of like remembering all the things that made us weird as a kid. And we can see now, as we kind of come into our own as adults and find our niches in our respective careers, that, oh yeah, that's there, that's there, that's there. Oh, that's like central, actually, that thing,
Yeah.
So I really believe that one. What made you weird as a kid?
Yeah, I have been a maker
Hmm.
from as far as I can remember, and I was a maker without any support. I had no older brother, I had no kids in my neighborhood to help me. The best I had were some books that I could find that would tell me how to do things. And this, of course, later on, why my big attraction at Whole Earth was because I was desperately always trying to figure out how to do stuff. And I made model railway things from scrounging stuff down by the railroad tracks. I made a nature museum, found a book describing how to make exhibits. I was like 10 or 12, making exhibits, having the kids in my neighborhood collect specimens, whether it be leaves or flowers, and then I would press them, or I would mount. I made a butterfly nets and killers and would mount them and in display cases, which I made not very well because I hardly had any tools. I mean, there were no power tools. And so I made exhibits about ultraviolet light and rocks that I collected. I was fully into that. And I was a weird kid who had a nature museum. I was charging people $0.25 to come see my nature museum. All right. So
so entrepreneurial too.
Yeah, well, the quarters were, here's what I asked, and later on I went in to make a chemistry lab. The quarters were to buy chemical glassware. All right. So I needed glassware and I needed chemicals for my next thing. So yeah, that was strange. That kind of went on to, do a lot of building eventually a house, to building things for our house, and then later on my own house. But that making part set me apart a little bit. And I was the other thing that I was doing, I was a mail order crazy. This is again a era that has passed. But in the old days, the only way to find out information was to send for mail order catalogs, because again, that was the variety. They were the web pages of the past, where you'd send for a catalog about optical, where you could buy optical lenses and stuff, and you'd have a catalog, and that catalogs became these possibility spaces where you could see all the different lenses that were available and mirrors and stuff, and that would be the source of ideas about what to make. And hearing about a catalog and mailing it around for it. So I was collecting these mail order catalogs as a kid. I had no money. This was, you send a postcard, which is where I had my money. I could buy a postcard asking for their catalog to be sent to me, even though I could never even afford to buy anything from them. I was collecting these possibilities. And that was also a little strange too, because again, I was still in middle school when I started doing that. And of course, that fits right into the Whole Earth catalog later on, which I would discover later on, saying, "Oh yeah, this is my thing. This is what I've been doing all along."
Yeah. I invented a thumb piano when I was a little kid.
There you go.
Like, I invented the thumb piano. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized that Africans had invented it, centuries ago.
Yeah.
But I used to play with a ruler on the edge of the desk, and you could flick the ruler and it'd go,
yeah.
And the shorter you made the ruler, the higher the pitch.
Right.
So I asked my dad to give me some kind of metal that was bendable that I could cut. So he gave me a bunch of old hacksaw blades.
That's right.
And I cut them to different sizes and put them on a little board, and invented the thumb piano.
That's really cool. That's really cool. There you go. There's an evidence of your weirdness, and I'm glad hope you haven't lost that.
No, definitely not.
I see a synthesizer. It looks like a synth on your tabletop, so maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, I've got little instruments that I've made too. So that's still there for sure. And I just started coordinating a makerspace here in our small rural community.
Okay.
And the makerspace movement, I think, comes right out of that thing that started with the Whole Earth catalog.
Absolutely, 100%. It was no accident that it was coming out of the Bay Area. In fact, Tim O'Reilly originally wanted me to edit Make Magazine, but I was writing a book at the time. So my partner here for Cool Tools is Mark Freundwerder, who did edit Make. So that was 100% derived from the Whole Earth catalog, the hippie kind of movement, which then morphed into the Silicon Valley stuff. And now there's just tremendous amount of people making hardware, making physical things, making stuff. It's a shame that the Maker Faire didn't work, but that may be coming back.
Yeah. The next one kind of piggybacks on the first one. So remembering what made you weird as a kid. Now, prescription for popular success: do something strange, make a habit of your weird.
Yeah, it's very much the same thing. I'm repeating myself a little bit, but a better maybe extension of this idea is my advice to a 20-year-old, which is to spend as much time as you possibly can working somewhere where they don't have a name for what it is that you're doing, where you might have to spend a half hour explaining to your parents what it is you do. That's a really good sign, because it's going to help you drift towards that place where you are the only one doing it. And that's part of your weirdness, is that it's should be singular if possible. If you're kind of weird in a kind of traditional way, there's not much use in that.
There's a stereotype that fits, like, he's the cranky old eccentric who tinkers with cars or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Or the kid playing Dungeons and Dragons in the basement. Yeah. Okay. That's not really.
They go,
weird.
Typical nerd. Yeah.
Right. That's not that weird, really. If you're playing, Dungeons and Dragons, in a full cosplay costume, and that's the only way you can play. All right. Well, that's starting to get weird.
That's the kid who invented LARPing.
Yeah, exactly.
And then other people were drawn to that weirdness, and it was like, oh, I want to do that too.
So I have a friend who went into LARPing. His kid was so into LARPing that he was doing it full time. if you can believe that.
Full-time LARPing. That's not LARPing anymore, though. That's just living it.
No, but he was running the events and stuff.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so his weirdness, and now he's into games, but he's managed to keep his childhood weirdness going. When I think that's really what we're talking about. So
That's
yeah,
in,
go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to comment. That's interesting what you say about working at a place where it would take you half an hour to describe what you do to your parents.
Right.
So I've been thinking about my own kind of branding out there in the world, trying to, cut through all of the noise. How do I like make myself remarkable or explain my approach and that kind of thing? Somebody I did a consultation with last week, he said, you're hard to categorize. And I thought, well, yeah, I know. Tell me about it. I've been trying to figure out a category. Now, how important is it to be able to give somebody an elevator pitch of what you do?
Right.
Or do you leave it up to them to do the work to figure it out or find it out?
Right. This is a great topic. So when Wired began, what people don't remember, if you were around at all, was it was a really hard sell. It was a very, very improbable success. The chances of it succeeding was very, very low because it wasn't in any of the categories of existing magazines. And the main reason why that's a problem is not so much the readers, but the advertisers. They don't know who or why, and they don't have categories for you. So it was not a technology magazine, which would mean you'd have computer companies advertising in you, the Apples and the Microsoft and the chip companies. It wasn't a tech magazine that way. There were lots of those, Mac World, PC World, just fat with ads, but they were all technology ads. And so we were saying, well, you can think of us as a lifestyle magazine, which meant like GQ or Details, Esquire. And they're saying, well, I don't know what kind of articles are you writing? Let's see. It's like, this doesn't fit in anything we know. We're saying, well, we're a technology lifestyle magazine. They say, well, what is that? And so, and this is issue because there was the advertiser buyers, and then there was like, where does the newsstand put you? They're going to want to show you face up. Where are they going to put you? And so we didn't have one, which was both the worst thing and the best thing about it. It was the best thing because for almost a decade, we didn't have any competition whatsoever. There was just nothing else even remotely like it because we were our own category of one. That was a bad thing for a lot of commercial reasons because news stands don't know where to slot us. The advertisers didn't have a column for us. And so we had to make up a story we had to kind of invent a category, give it a name. And that turned out to be really important. And I was slow to understand how important that was, which is that you kind of have to come to some way to describe what you're doing because you can't have other people describe what you're doing because they're not going to get it right in a certain sense. So it became really important that we articulate what it was we thought we were doing. That changed over time, but it was really important that we try to articulate what it was. And so we invented this category, it's called the tech lifestyle, which did not exist and was not there, but we're calling it that, and that's maybe not what we ended up in, but that's so there was two things going along. One is we want to be someplace where they don't have the language, but at the same time, you want to be the one supplying the language to it. Okay, so you want to describe yourself, and the thing I learned about that is you can't do it once. You have to kind of keep repeating it over and over and over again.
Like refining the message, or just keep repeating that same message to get it out there.
Both.
Yeah,
refining it and then repeating it. If you wait for people to kind of figure it out, they're not going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And if they do, they're going to kind of come to something. So the stronger branding thing is that you describe the brand, you articulate it, you you make it, you invent it, and then apply it, to yourself and others too. So, so I would say for yourself, again, I haven't thought about this, but I would recommend the same thing, which is it's really fantastic that you're in this place that's hard to categorize. You shouldn't try and categorize yourself other than to make up a new category and then to work on developing that in some way that communicates something that you can then, change, refine, tweak over time as you come to understand more about what it is that you're doing. But you should be the one articulating that. It's kind of like the way people have business cards these days, which is really great with these new occupations that didn't exist before. But it's really helpful to have a name of what you think you're doing. My daughter was the experienced designer. Well, I never saw that before, but okay, it's something. Gives me a name.
Mhm. Or it opens up a deeper conversation.
Yeah.
Somebody goes, "What kind of experience?"
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, that's good too. That's what I found as well as like my ability to articulate it to the kind of the mission statement or whatever evolves over time as I discover
Right.
what it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's
So it
important.
took us at least a decade to understand at Wired what it was that we were doing and what our brand kind of was or whatever. So
Mm.
long now where I'm a co-chair of this, organization that's taking the long view, building the clock in the mountain that tick for 10,000 years. We've had our first quarter, which is a quarter century, 25 years. It's taken us 25 years to figure out what it is that we're really trying to do. So,
Well,
that's okay.
that makes me feel better because it's I feel like, God, shouldn't I have it figured out by now?
No,
Shouldn't I
no.
have it nailed down? Like, am I holding back my reach because it's constantly evolving and refining and
No, I don't. I
Yeah.
think that's part of your journey, but I do know there was another piece of advice in there. The thing I learned from the ad guys, or making people who made ads, which was and the headline writers at like The Economist, in newspapers was simplify, then exaggerate, or exaggerate to simplify. But simplify things, simplify it, and simplify it. And then when you have that, then you exaggerate, you amplify whatever it was that you found at the core. And that's sort of, again, you want to be doing that.
Yeah.
The Unabashed Self-Promoter's Guide, which I loved, was a really crazy little book. Talked about when you're on TV, when you're in the press, and when you're in situations like this, what you want to be able to do is you want to give the brand. You can't allow people, or you shouldn't expect people to kind of figure out your brand from watching you. You actually have to kind of tell them over and over again what it is.
Yeah, give them the tagline.
Right.
Yeah, or the byline. Yeah. Related, this one is good too. It reminds me of advice that Seth Godin gives on finding out what makes you remarkable. You say, don't be the best, be the only.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a heavy ask.
It is. It's way, way too big. So the best of something is very limited. There's only one, number one. And if you're trying to be the best basketball player, the best poker player, the best accountant, I don't know, the best short story novelist, that there can only be one of those people, and you're very, very unlikely to match that exactly. And but there's a billion different onlys that are possible. And the only is probably much more likely for your unique mix of talents, abilities, and experiences in life. So you want to head to the only, and the problem is that, as you said, it's a really big ask. It's a very high bar. It's really, really hard when you're young, especially, to figure out what it is that you can only do that no one else can, or people find hard, you find easy, things that few would even want to attempt. That is really, really hard. And a lot of young people say, I don't have anything I'm passionate about. I don't know what I'm good at. And so I would say, yes, this is not a destination that you reach quickly. It's a direction that you're headed in.
Hmm.
You're headed in a direction, you're approaching it sort of asymptotically. You're never going to reach it. Even when you reach at my age, you're still not there, but you're moving in that general direction. And that's all that counts. It doesn't, in that way, it doesn't really matter where you start. You don't have to have your passion to start. You just have to kind of master something and get going. And then you gradually will creep in that direction if you're paying attention. And it may be a long time before you feel like you're even remotely close to what it is that you can do only. But again, it doesn't matter because your path is going to be a meandering thing full of detours and right turns and dead ends and backups and downturns, which, by the way, is exactly the same path that everybody remarkable that you admire has gone through. It just doesn't look that way.
Mhm.
It looks like, oh, they just kind of arrived there. No, they did not.
Yeah.
Just read some biographies.
Yeah.
Nobody arrived there like that. They're all just by the skin of their teeth, near-death experiences, going broke, whatever it is. It's full of it. And in fact, the more full of those kinds of changes and setbacks and stuff, the brighter they're going to shine as they come close to arriving at being the best you that they could be.
Right. Yeah, because life experiences like that shape the character, and the
Absolutely.
character is who you are. Yeah. And a lot of the people that I really admire, sometimes I would be really intimidated by the quality and amount of work they put out, but a lot of them didn't even start getting their stuff together until they were in their like 50s or 60s,
Yeah.
after a lifetime of career changes, divorces, failures, whatever, people
Yeah.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
hearing it, failed attempts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're trying it and doesn't quite work. And usually what it is we're often not imitating, but trying to follow someone else's definition of success. I mean, that's the thing about trying to be, say, the best basketball player is that's a very well defined definition of success.
Yeah.
If you're trying to be right now today in AI world, the very best AI prompter, AI whisperer, we don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
All
Well, that's
right.
what I was thinking. Like so many vocations are kind of immeasurable in the way you could say the best basketball player is the one who scored the most amount of points over a certain
Yeah.
amount of
Yeah.
time. But like, who's the best counselor or teacher, or like philosopher?
Right.
It's so subjective. So forget it. All you can do is somehow lean into what makes you
Yeah. Exactly.
remarkable or different or
Right.
unique, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, there again, these weird places that you don't have a language for what it is that you're doing. Like I have a friend's daughter who became a horse therapist.
Hmm.
She works with horses for therapeutic, working with people who respond to horses through therapy. It was like I not in a million years would have ever even thought that that was something, but that's her professional occupation. Okay. And so she wasn't like the best horse, whatever they call, athlete.
Equine therapist
Yeah, or
yeah.
equine athlete. She
Mhm.
wasn't the best therapist. It was this other thing where, at least in her town, she was the only one. And so that's more likely where you being who you are is going to end up is if you are truly looking and working and moving forward, you're going to land is somewhere where your weird little meandering story is going to be perfect
Mhm.
for what you wind up doing in the long term. You don't want, you want to arrive there like anybody else as soon as you can, but I think you should expect a kind of long and winding road to arrive there. And
Yeah.
and the other piece of advice in the book, which is that we get frustrated over things that don't work out in a month or even a year, but if we give ourselves a decade, we can accomplish miracles. It's amazing what you can accomplish in a decade. So you should think of these things as multi-decade project. And if you see it that way. Maybe not in your 20s.
Mhm.
All right. Maybe barely in your 30s. But if you can be there in your 40s, that'd be tremendous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the next one I'd pulled out was keep showing up. 99% of
Yeah.
success is just showing up. In fact, most success is just persistence.
Right.
So that's related to what you're talking about. Like
Right.
keep going with it, give it time to develop and gain traction,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So my question to you is, how do you know when to give up on an
Yes.
idea?
Because that is another bit of advice, which is success is like never giving up, plus giving up for the things that aren't going to work. And then 3, the wisdom to discern the difference. I think going back to the don't be the best, be the only, the curious paradox of the universe is that you can't become fully yourself by yourself. It takes everybody around you to become unique. Again, that makes no sense, but that's the way it is. The only way you're really going to be unique is if you have the help of everybody else. And so part of, I think, this journey of discovering when you should give up things is to pay attention to your family, friends, customers, colleagues, clients, the audience. They will be telling you certain things. That's the reality. You have to kind of pay attention to that. It doesn't mean you have to obey them. It just means you need to pay attention to that. And I have another bit of advice in the book, which is when someone tells you something you're wrong, they're usually right. But when they tell you what the solution to it is, they're usually wrong. So people are really good at detecting things not being right. They're not so good about the imaginative aspect of what is going to be right, but they can tell when it's not working. And so you can't decide that you're never, ever going to give up. If in fact you should give up, and how do you tell? I think you have to pay a little bit of attention to reality of what
Right.
people are saying. What is the matter? What is the signal? There's a signal. It doesn't, again, maybe you have to just tweak things, and maybe that you have to shift the view.
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't give up. It's hard to tell, but you cannot rely on yourself entirely for that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there's got to be some discernment in there. Like on one side, if you're doing something truly unique, people may not quite understand it yet, or you may be ahead of the
Right.
curve
Too early.
too early.
Right.
But also at the same time, like listening to those signals. Like for
Right.
me, it's like what gains traction on social media? Like what are people actually interested in? What grabs their
Sure.
attention and holds it enough that
Right.
they comment or something, right?
Right. Yeah. 15 years ago, you could have been involved in something. Like, well, it's like you're telling your parents, it's like radio, but it's not quite radio. It's like a magazine interview, but it's not quite that. You're going around trying to describe podcasting. But 30 years ago, if you're trying to do podcasting or something, it's like no matter how much you believed in that possibility and tried hard, it's probably not going to work. And that's not a matter. I mean, just sheer belief and willpower alone is not going to be enough to make it work. So you have to pay attention to the realities of things, because there's plenty of things I could imagine today that are just, and again, my willpower alone is not sufficient to bring them into existence in a kind of sustainable way. So there is a balancing of the reality, what the world demands and values, and what you are capable and desire of, and you have to dance with that. And I think relying on other people around is the main way to do it. I think some people here, march to your own drum, become the best you, be unique, be the only, and they think that's a solo job. And quite the contrary, as I said, you cannot become fully yourself by yourself. You
Yeah.
have to have people around you, because they're going to see who you're becoming before you are. We're opaque to ourselves. That's why we have therapists. That's why we have all these things, because we're just literally built to be incapable of having direct access to that. It's too dangerous. We could mess around. So it's obscured deliberately. And so we have to work really hard at seeing that. And we need the other people around us to show us that.
That's great. Okay, I know we're pressed for time. I just want to say I've already started taking some of your advice. And last night I learned how to make a bowline.
Hey, yeah, there you go. You'll never forget. Well, keep practicing, because the thing about knots, it's all practice. You want to be able to do it without thinking too hard.
Yeah. One question I got for you about that, its usefulness is obvious to me. As I started to play with it, I started to put it around bottles and things and go, oh yeah, this is great. But you mentioned in the book that you learn how to do it with one hand.
Yes.
I mean, how do you do that? Because that's a tough knot to do with one hand.
It is. It is hard to do. I have my thing right here, which I practice with.
Oh, right on.
And actually, I saw a guy just recently do the bowline on a boat by flipping it like this. It was like so amazing. I'd never seen anything. There are lots of different ways to tie it. Keep practicing. You will. There's some videos on YouTube that show you how to do it with one hand. But yeah, you kind of flip it around. I have to actually run right now, but you can do it with one hand. So
great. Yeah, I'll check it out.
Good thing.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I really appreciate it, man.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.